Hello everybody and welcome to the British Pint. My channel is now 1 year old and I think that's a great anniversary to do something that I did a year ago, and that was the first video I ever uploaded about the Fuller's ESB clone. So today we will be doing that again, and while I'm at it and I have the yeast ready, why not do the Fuller's London Porter as well? So we will do 2 beers as I have done in the past and I really like to do nowadays on a nice Sunday, and see if I manage to finish everything before midnight. The Fuller's ESB last time was made with the recipe in the Brew Your Own British Real Ale book. I have the book here now because I will use the recipe for the London Porter, where the recipe is much simpler. But for the Fuller's ESB, there is this infamous party guy recipe where they are making the London Pride, the Fuller's ESB and the Chiswick Bitter, all three in one go with 2 different coppers where they collect the first word or the first guile and the second guile and then mix them afterwards to 3 different beers. So this is quite a complicated thing, and I went through the podcast from the Brewing Network where in 2010 they interviewed John Keeling, the head brewer at Fuller's, then head brewer at Fuller's. I think he's retired by now. And so I want to do the same thing, but I don't want to do the party guy. So one recommendation that I found online was to do just a mash sparge. So I'm just going to do a full liquor for the mash, that is 7 liters. I'm going to mash in with that and then sparge it out, but not put any water on top. No sparge liquor. Sparge liquor 0, mash liquor 7 liters. And that is basically going to reduce my efficiency. I'm going to get less sugar out of it, but I'm going to have all the protein from the grain because that dissolves a bit quicker from my understanding. So the body will be very full. And now my efficiency will be reduced, so I will use about, I guess, 15% more grain. So I use 50% more grain, but I hope that will give me the right gravity, and so my protein to sugar ratio in the end will be higher. And that makes a very full-bodied beer that just feels different in the mouth, more than it is very sweet. So that is what we're going for. There is something that is a bit particular because you have the podcast from 2010 and you can do the Fuller's ESB according to that recipe and get it very accurately. But there was a Twitter post recently where a brewer published the Brewing notebook in 2018 from the exact brew day that they had that day, and the recipe slightly changed in the meantime. So they used to have 95% pale malt and 5% crystal 150. And in the newer one, they say, 93% pale malt and 7% crystal light. And I actually was very confused by that, but I realized then that Crisp is a company that uses the name Crystal Light for the crystal 150, which actually in European EBC is 170, so it's even darker. But I think in the podcast they also recommend you to use the Crisp 150 crystal malt. And I cannot recommend you enough to do that as well. So that's what I'm going for. Many thanks to YouTube user Waymay, who gave me a lot of the different British crystal malts that he had too much of. So he sent me a package with a lot of these. I'll be using his now, and I'm very happy about that. So that's 93% pale malt, 7% crystal malt, and then they use 0.2% chocolate malt in that note. That is really just to very slightly tune the color. I am going to also add some acid malt because in the podcast he just casually mentions that he does some acidification of the mash to bring it to the proper mash pH. And I did a lot of calculations with the London water profile. So I checked the current tap water profile from the quarter Chiswick in London, loaded that into my water program, played a bit with the malt bill and grain bill and tried to get to a pH of 5.4. And then I changed my own water with a bit of additions and then acid malt to get to the same range. So they have a water that has very low chloride, I think 40 ppm, and low sulfate, but very high carbonate and also high calcium, more than I have actually. I thought mine would be a bit harder, but my water is by far not as hard as the London water. I'm not going to add chalk though, because I really don't have any means to do that properly and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But the important part is that for the London Porter, they say they do not adjust the water at all. For the Fuller's ESB, they Burtonize it, and I found a note somewhere hidden in the internet that they want to get both sulfate and calcium above 200. ppm. That is more than the amount of sulfate that they actually wrote in this brewer notebook, but I couldn't really understand what they were saying there. I think something like 1.33 grams per kilogram, so kilogram malt, but it doesn't really make much sense to me. So I just went to my water calculator and added stuff until things looked right. I do that by adding 3 grams of calcium sulfate and 1 gram of calcium chloride. You can see in the video the tiny amounts that I use there. Quite difficult to weigh, but it should be fine. And that will give me a chloride to sulfate ratio, or a sulfate to chloride ratio of 3.5, whereas theirs appears to have actually 7 to 1 or something insanely high like that. I'm not going to go there because I just cannot, with all the minerals in my water, very easily do that. I want to use my standard tap water and not start from distilled water. So that just was a clarification. I will put the link to the Fuller's tap water in my in the video description, including the grain bill that I created, and that's what I'm going to use. According to the podcast, they use 64 to 65 degrees Celsius mash, and they let it stand for 60 minutes. I'm going to do that as well. It's actually mashed in behind me already, so I'm going to check it in an hour, maybe heat it up after half an hour to be sure that I stay in the proper range. So, of course, they do a very complicated sparge method. They actually sparge a lot. I think they sparge until they have an incredibly low gravity in the run out. But they do it with a low temperature. They stay at 65 degrees. So they do not collect any tannins out of it. So that might be the reason why they're creating a huge amount of wort. They have a very low half of gravity in the second wort and very high half of gravity in the other wort. And that's why they can create such a wide range. Because the range of beers that you can create is limited by the maximum minimum values that you create. Okay, so to bitter. The podcast says that they bitter 80% of the bittering values from the bitter hop, that is target, and they get 20% of the later additions and the dry hop. Now, I can't calculate the dry hop, but I can calculate the later additions. After boiling, they have a 30 minutes whirlpool, so I played a bit with that. And if I assume that for 20 minutes it's above 80 degrees, then I do get some IBU extractions that are similar to what he said, 80 to 20. So I will keep my wort for 20 minutes above 80 degrees and then cool it down. So the current values are 35 IBU and 32 EBC for that beer, and 5.9% ABV, which is also different from what is in the book, but I think podcast and the other one agreed with that. I went for 4 grams of target, 12% alpha acid, 2 grams of Challenger, 6.3% alpha acid, 2 grams of North Down, 7% alpha acid, and 1 gram of Golding, East Kent Golding in my case. What is it? 4% alpha acid? Yeah, 4% for the hop cones. I have hop cones still, some left. And the Challenger, North Down, and Golding are all late additions, 2 minutes of the boil, just very late, very short boil. And then it gets a double dry hop, double only if it's the bottle one. The other one gets a single dry hop and then one in the cask, which is not mentioned in the brewer's notes. So you need to keep that in mind. So double dry hop, it used to be Goldings. In the new book, they call it Target. So I'm going to do a double dry hop with Target. It's 0.77 grams per liter. So that's really nice that you can calculate that stuff from the things they say there. So for me, that would be 3 grams for my 4 liters. First, a dry hop in the fermentation vessel, and then one in the maturation keg, which I'm going to use as well. They say it's matured for at least 2 weeks, more likely 4, so I'm going to go for 4 weeks for both beers, even though the Fuller's London Porter might not be completely rounded off. Oh yeah, the fermentation. Okay, so I'm going to use the Fuller's house yeast, which is, for example, the Y yeast, what is it? Actually, I don't know. Y yeast, is it English ale? It's the White Labs 002 English ale. I definitely know that. Not sure about the Y yeast. I'm going to use the Imperial Yeast Pub Ale, which is the same strain as they say. And well, something that you need to keep in mind is this is a single strain. Fuller's use a double strain, and I believe I read in Martin Cornell's book Amber, Black and Gold that they use a triple strain before the 60s. So I'm going to use this one. They do a very interesting temperature run. So they pitch at 17 degrees. I have a room that has 16 degrees now. I'm going to put the yeast in there now. Try to cool my wort down to 17 degrees. And then they let it rise naturally to 20 degrees. I set up the guest room in our house for 20 degrees now. So I'll do the same, let it rise. Then they let it ferment at 20 degrees until it has half gravity. I will try to get that, though my refractometer is not really accurate for in between fermentation. All the calculators work with beginning and end, not in between. So I'm not sure how good that will work. Then they cool down again to 17 degrees. I can do that by switching off the heat, no problem. Though I'm not sure how cold that room gets. Maybe I have to transfer it to another room in the cellar. We'll see. I have to constantly, depending on the weather, measure rooms and move it around a bit. But my containers are really small. So you probably saw that before. With these containers, you just carry them. No issue. Oops, sorry. Okay, so we stay at 17 degrees until the gravity is down to 1/4 to 1/5. And then they put it into the cold crash at 6 degrees and then into the maturation tank. So cold crash is 2 days and then maturation for at least 2 weeks. As I said, maturation at 10 degrees. They call that warm maturation. I need to get some carbon dioxide, so I will have to put it in the keg for a week warm at least, maybe 2, and then bring it to 10 degrees. I cannot just do it all the time. They are using, well, I think they are getting some carbonation at 10 degrees. I'm not sure how accurate I can do that so that the yeast is still alive and doesn't precipitate. But they are adding carbon dioxide if necessary at the end, so they probably don't care. So yeah, they do a chill proofing. I'm not going to do that. They flash pasteurize the bottles, so that's something that's really important because I do not have any flash pasteurization, and it also means that the beer becomes slightly more caramelized, as far as I understand. And so the bottle that I will use to compare it, I have a bottle of Fuller's ESB and a bottle of London Porter. These bottles might be more caramelly than my beer will be. I really have to go to London to try some cask ale. Maybe I can manage to do it this year. Would be really looking forward to that. But that would be that beer, and then the Fuller's London Porter is really easy. I calculated the percentages back from the book. So they use 76% pale malt, 12% brown malt, 10% crystal malt, 2% chocolate malt. And for me, because I want to get to a gravity of, what is it, 1054? Yeah. So we want to get 5.4 ABV, which is different from the book, 37 IBU, which is different from the book. I'm not sure about the color. They say 100 EBC in the book. Maybe we keep the same. So I recalculated some of the values, and I need 950 grams of malt. So I'm going to use, because I add a little bit of acid malt, because that's what I need to get to 5.4 pH for my water. So I'm going to use 74% pale malt. I mash it at 66 degrees for 60 minutes, just because I don't know any details. I stay with the book recipe. I'll add fuggle. There's a lot of fuggle that goes in there because fuggle has a very low alpha acid. It has 5% in the book, or 4.9. I actually have a package with 5%, so I'm going to use that. I don't have cones anymore, unfortunately. 15 grams, slightly higher than they say here, because I want to get to 37 IBU. 15 grams of fuggle, 90-minute boil, and then 4 grams of fuggle, 10-minute boil. And that is the recipe. Then everything else will be the same as the Fuller's ESB. So that was the rushed, quick work through. I'm pretty confident how this brewing will work. I will probably just put a few rice hulls in the mash so that the sparging will work properly. But that's pretty much everything. And then I will not talk to you again afterwards when I pitch. I will just record a few videos during the day. Hopefully it's just 10 hours or something. Actually 10 hours would already mean midnight. It's exactly 2 p.m. Well, let's hope it's maybe 8 hours or something like that. Yeah. And then we'll see. The cooling down will probably be the most difficult and longest taking. We'll see. Yeah, so enjoy the video, enjoy the brewing collection that I put out there. And then we'll see each other again for the tasting, where we're really curious if I manage to get really accurately towards these two beers. Fuller's ESB is supposed to taste a lot like orange marmalade, and the Fuller's London Porter a lot like chocolate. Very clear flavors. So we'll see if I manage that. And then I'll see you again then, and until then, take care.